And we're back with the show. It's once again Gerald Glassford coming right back at you here. Week 10 in the NFL is almost upon us. The entire weekend, we're focusing on a lot of great matchups. It looks like it's going to be another interesting weekend in the NFL. And we got to break it down for everyone out there that has a fantasy football team that needs to know what direction to go and wants the latest news. But we wouldn't be able to do that without the fantasy football guru. He is, again, the fantasy football guru for the Fantasy Football Pay Dirt podcast. You got to check out full episodes of the Fantasy Football Pay Dirt podcast each and every week on the Pop Culture Cosmos channel, available now on Podbean, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and so many other different outlets. And join the Facebook group today, Fantasy Football Pay Dirt podcast. There you can ask questions about your lineups, trades, changes that you might want to make, waiver wire pickups, and a whole lot more. You can throw those questions out there, and you can also directly message this man himself because he is the man in the know when it comes to fantasy football. It is Tyler Baker. Another great weekend coming up for you, my friend, in the NFL.
Yeah, man, it's good to be on the show. And did you happen to see that game tonight where Pittsburgh dropped 52 points on the Carolina Panthers? Oh my gosh, it was brutal. If you're a Carolina fan, or if you had anybody other than Christian McCaffrey starting in your fantasy league from Carolina, it was a brutal night.
Wasn't too bad of a night for Cam Newton, but just wasn't the night that I was hoping for. I know that he was somebody that both you and I were thinking with the back end of the schedule coming now, because we are in the second half of the season, that it would look like more and more like Cam Newton would be able to dominate. Just didn't get that performance today from a so-so Pittsburgh defense, but we got a great performance from Ben Roethlisberger. Do you think that Ben's performance is a precursor to maybe a dominant second half of the season going forward?
They've steadily improved. Now, keep in mind, Pittsburgh, for as great as a team, as a franchise as they are, Pittsburgh always finds a way to play down to their opponents. So I would be careful whenever they play the Browns or whenever they play kind of a so-so team. They do have that tendency to kind of play down to their opponents, but they've been improving this season. Their defense has steadily gotten better. And this is not what you wanted to see from Carolina, but do keep in mind that Cam Newton's schedule in the fantasy playoffs is really good.
I will say, I'll continue on this. I'll continue on this by saying that Le'Veon Bell, there were sightings of him in the city of Pittsburgh in some gyms, working out, etc., cryptic tweets, yada, 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 so on and so forth. But nothing really has ever materialized yet. He still has a few days to go before he has to make a decision one way or the other. So at this point in time, it looks like more and more that he is getting less and less when it comes to leverage, when it comes to his contract dispute and his holdout with the Pittsburgh Steelers.
Yeah, well, watching the game tonight, commentated by Troy Aikman and what's the Buck guy? What's his name?
Joe Buck?
Yeah, Joe Buck. Man, those guys are awful. I mean, in the same sentence, Troy Aikman says, Todd Haley, he just got fired with the Browns, but everywhere he goes, he just does a really, really good job. Just stop. Like Troy Aikman, do you even hear yourself? But even the commentators tonight were saying that the ownership of the Steelers expects Le'Veon Bell to show up. He has until Tuesday to show up. I mean, it's now or never. And, your guess is as good as mine. I don't think anybody's going to know until Tuesday. But the ownership is expecting him back. I think it would be just a mistake on top of a mistake to punt the year and just not play in 2018. So, hey, hopefully we'll get Le'Veon Bell back on the football field.
We'll know one way or the other by next week, that's for sure. But there are more great games coming up this weekend in the NFL. One that I want to go ahead and focus on is Cincinnati, which is getting a really, really good team in New Orleans, coming off a nice win against the Rams. They're marching into Cincinnati to face off against the Bengals. Your thoughts on that matchup, and especially now that AJ Green is out. So if you have him on your fantasy roster, unfortunately, you're going to have to sit him out because he's got a toe injury that's just not helping him out at all.
Yeah, for Cincinnati, AJ Green is out, and for New Orleans, Des Bryant is in. So, looking at Cincinnati, look, the natural progression, I guess, would be Tyler Boyd, and Tyler Boyd is going to get a lot of targets. I expect him to get a lot of targets, a lot of work, but Tyler Boyd is a good complementary piece. Tyler Boyd is not super fast. He's not super athletic. I've heard it described as he has a good old man game. You know, he just does a lot of things really well, but he's not a standout. And he's a very good complement to AJ Green because AJ Green can take the pressure away and Tyler Boyd can find those open spots on the field. With Tyler Boyd getting more attention, we'll just have to see. But I think what it's going to end up being, I think you're going to see a lot of CJ Uzmanzada. I think, or Uzama. I always get his name wrong. I would expect Giovanni Bernard and Joe Mixon to be catching passes out of the backfield. And then John Ross, you know, it would be nice if he could put it together, but other than having absolute blazing speed, the guy is just a mistake waiting to happen. So maybe even Alex Erickson, a guy that they have on special teams, and a guy that I've actually seen them in 2-minute drills go to when the game is on the line. That happened last year. And then so they have packages for Alex Erickson, really fast guy, athletic, quick. But they're going to have to just patch it together because that Cleveland team, that Cincinnati team is going to have to score points to keep up, or at least try to keep up with New Orleans. I don't think they will. Then on New Orleans side of the ball, they signed Des Bryant this week. Cameron Meredith is done for the year with injury, and they wanted to bring someone in. I'm not expecting too much out of Des Bryant. I think he's, at least for fantasy, I think he's going to be touchdown dependent. Des Bryant was never a speedster. He was never a guy that was going to burn downfield. Des Bryant is a contested catch, physical, my ball mentality type of receiver. So I would expect his production to be red zone targets and, you know, throw a fade to him in the end zone when they get down into the red zone. I would expect him to see some high value targets, but I don't expect a lot of volume. They've already got Traquan Smith there who can stretch the field, and then Michael Thomas does all those great things as a receiver, and he has the complete trust of Drew Brees, and they got a couple weapons out of the backfield that they can throw the ball to. So I'm not expecting a lot of volume from Des Bryant. I would expect about what you saw from Cam Meredith, which was not a lot, but maybe a little bit heavier on the high-valued end zone targets for Des Bryant.
One last game I want to focus on for this weekend in the NFL before we touch on I'll touch on your thoughts as in a whole, especially the fact that there's a lot of teams out on bye this week. That game I want to touch on is Washington at Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay, we've talked about the Fitzmagic coming back. Looked okay, looked pretty good. 4 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. That's not bad. You'll take it as far as fantasy production is concerned. But on the other side of the ball, you have Washington, which has a lot of issues, in my opinion, as far as some unfulfilled promise. Alex Smith, Adrian Peterson have looked good at times, have looked okay at times, but neither to the point where either of them is really standing out at this point in time. And unfortunately, with a push coming, the push that's needed in the second half of the season, they just may not be getting it if Alex Smith and Adrian Peterson are just not reaching that level that they once had.
Yeah, I didn't think Washington was a 5-2 team last week, and then they got beat pretty bad. And not only did they get beat bad last week, but the injuries are just starting to pile up. Now, for the better part of the season, they haven't had Jamison Crowder, who I think is probably their best receiver. They haven't had Chris Thompson, which brings a completely different dynamic to the game. And then last week they lost In the game, they lost 3 offensive linemen. Trent Williams, their um, all pro or at least Pro Bowl left tackle. He had to have thumb surgery. He's out a month. And then they lose 3 more starters on the offensive line. It was getting so bad on the offensive line that they almost had to bring a defensive lineman to play guard. So, and add on top of that, Paul Richardson, their free agent acquisition receiver, he's out for the year. This team is an absolute mess. And even before all of those injuries, Alex Smith just wasn't getting it done in the passing game. The one bright spot was Adrian Peterson, but you take an offensive line that's completely crushed. I mean, they're signing guys off the street to start this weekend. So the value that Adrian Peterson had, I would really question that. I don't think that there's any value at all on this Washington offense until maybe Chris Thompson comes back, because Chris Thompson can do some things on the field that Adrian Peterson definitely can't. So as far as Washington's offense, there's nobody you can start. Maybe in a pinch, Jordan Reed or Vernon Davis. But then who's going to get the ball? Jordan Reed, Vernon Davis. Who knows? It's just too much of a headache. Stay away. If you have been relying on Adrian Peterson's pretty steady numbers, you're very nervous right now. I don't think he's startable at all. Now, looking at Tampa Bay, Washington's defense is pretty good. They didn't show it last week, but they are pretty good. And this is another week for Clinton Dix to get assimilated into the offense. Get assimilated into that defense. So this is going to be a challenge for Tampa Bay, but there's no way that Washington's offense can keep up. Especially when Jay Gruden, for the entire time I've watched him coach, if it's long to go, it's a 2-yard pass every single time. And then this was with Kirk Cousins, and now they bring Alex Smith in, and in any time it's 3rd and long or 2nd and long or whatever, you can expect a 2-yard pass.
Once again, it is Tyler Baker from the Fantasy Football Pater podcast. Catch our full episodes each and every week. In fact, we just put one up the other day. That's available now on the Pop Culture Cosmos channel on Podbean, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and over 30 different podcast outlets. Plus, also catch Tyler each and every week, 2 times a week on our Pop Culture Cosmos and PCC Multiverse. And don't forget to sign up today at the Fantasy Football Pater podcast Facebook group. If you want to ask questions, there's over 200 fantasy football fans just like you, ready to answer your questions on waiver wire pickups, trades, lineup changes, and so much more. It is the Fantasy Football Pater podcast group on Facebook. My friend, it's going to be another great weekend on the way. It's going to be another great week. It's going to be another great weekend in the NFL. Any last thoughts on the way out?
I don't think I'll be watching Monday Night Football. The New York Giants travel to San Francisco to play the 49ers.
And that would be a first for him. I'll just tell you that right now. I know from experience. I will message him. Do you want to go on? Do you want to go record? Do you want to go? No, I'm watching. You want to go run?
Yeah.
You want to go? I'm watching. Okay.
I think when Monday comes around, I'll break and actually watch it. But I'm trying so hard to make other plans for Monday night.
Fair enough. I will say that there are a lot of other things that people want to know about when it comes to the NFL. Like, for instance, when it comes to all the teams that are on bye weeks, and there's a lot of productive teams on bye week this week, what can people do at this point in time to go ahead and just try to stay above water? Because we're now getting into the nitty-gritty when it comes to the latter part of the season for fantasy football owners. It's just at this point in time, you want to go ahead and make those maneuvers, make those moves. People like me who there are people that are out there that are on the back end of the schedule, the back end of the standings, that need to make a move now. There are others trying to right in the middle, the 500 mark, maybe going one way or the other. Their season's going in one direction or the other. And then there are people and then there are fantasy football owners just trying to do what they can to solidify those top spots that they already have. What are some of the best things you could say for advice right now? Because this is a critical point in the fantasy football season.
Yeah, most leagues have 4 games left. You have 4 weeks left. And if you're in a position where you really need to win, you have to take some chances. You have to make some gambles. And if that means going to the waiver wire and picking up a guy that could just have one good week and that's it, sometimes you just do what you got to do. It's difficult to give blanket advice when every manager in every league is a little bit different. But it is crunch time. It is time to take chances if you need to. But if you're sitting, at the top of the standings, you don't have to take chances. If you're, duking it out and you're in that top six, usually the top six make it into the playoffs, then just keep doing what you're doing. The trade deadline for most fantasy leagues is, I believe, next week. So if you were thinking about making a trade, you need to go ahead and make that happen. Because the trade deadline, I believe, is the 14th or 16th or something like that. But every league is different.
Because I know ESPN's is a little bit later, but I do know some other leagues are a little bit sooner rather than later.
Yeah, it just depends on your league, and you need to pay attention to that stuff. So if you want to make some tweaks, some changes, maybe you can get AJ Green for cheap. I think he's just going to be out a couple weeks. I'm really not sure. What did we find out about that, Gerald?
Only thing that's been determined as of yet is that he is a definite out for this weekend, and it probably will lead into a situation where he could be out another week as well. So it is leaning more into the 2-week period, although I wouldn't count on that 100%. He may give it a go depending on where they're at as far as the Cincinnati Bengals, because they are a team that's competitive and are fighting for a playoff spot.
Yeah. The last I saw, it was at least 2 games. That it's not gonna require surgery. So maybe if you can pick them up on the cheap, somebody's freaking out. Oh my gosh! And if you're in a pretty good position and you have the depth, go and try to get AJ Green. Why you can still make a trade. Is Le'Veon Bell going to come back? Is he not? I don't know. Maybe if Le'Veon comes back, maybe you can get James Conner for some good value. Try to work it while you can. But if you're at the bottom end of the standings and you have to win pretty much all of your games, it's time to get aggressive. And if you're sitting on Antonio Brown, you probably need to trade him and try to pick up a couple pieces. You're going to have to do something at this point. And that's when the Fantasy Football Pater Podcast Facebook group is a good way to get a hold of me. And there's a lot of really good fantasy players in that Facebook group. So, if you've got a dilemma, hey, I definitely need to win some games. Here's my roster. You might be able to get some good advice.
That's definitely a good plan indeed. My friend, like I said, it's going to be a great weekend in the NFL. Looking forward to catching all the games and hearing from you on our Monday show when it comes to the Pop Culture Cosmos. Always great to have you on the team, the fantasy football guru, Tyler Baker, and also just great to have you a part of the Pop Culture Cosmos.